By the time Harold Wexler's story had ended in a Louisiana ditch, the nation had already formed its opinion. Cold-blooded killer, controlling husband, manipulative liar. But to those who had known him for decades, it was harder to process. Harold had always been the quiet one. He wasn't warm or funny, but he was polite, professional, dependable, the kind of man who arrived 10 minutes early, wore a tie even on weekends, and paid his bills exactly on time. To his neighbors, he was just Harold, boring, maybe a little uptight, but never dangerous. But behind that bland exterior was a man unraveling for years. After his death, investigators combed through Harold's personal records, bank accounts, employment history. What they found painted a chilling portrait of a man obsessed with control, resentment, and image. Harold had grown up in a household where failure was not an option. His father had been a strict disciplinarian, a military veteran who ruled with silence and shame. Harold never rebelled. Instead, he internalized everything. He excelled in math, kept to himself, and built a quiet resentment toward anyone who questioned authority, especially women. When he met Elaine, she was 22, fresh out of college, working as a substitute teacher. She was radiant, warm, expressive, full of life. Harold was older, already stable, and he offered something she'd never had before: security. They married within a year, but once the wedding rings were on, the curtain fell. Harold became critical, demanding, not physically abusive at first, but emotionally invasive. He monitored her spending, chose her clothes, discouraged her from seeing friends. Elaine changed, slowly, quietly. Her bright laugh became less frequent. Her social life shrank. She put everything into being a good mother, a good wife, trying to hold the family together while her own identity faded away. By the 10th year of marriage, Harold had begun to isolate her completely. He discouraged her from renewing her teaching contract. He claimed it was about money, that it was easier if she stayed home. But it wasn't about money. It was about keeping her small. Then, something shifted. Elaine reconnected with her sister, who had moved back to Bedford Hollow. With her encouragement, Elaine started volunteering again at the school. Soon she was offered a part-time position, then full-time. It was like watching someone come back to life, and Harold hated it. He became erratic at home, silent, withdrawn. He made passive-aggressive remarks in front of the kids. When Elaine suggested marriage counseling, he refused. He didn't believe in therapy. "You fix a house by patching the walls," he said, "not by tearing the whole thing down." Elaine filed for separation in 1989. Harold fought it bitterly. He claimed she was poisoning the children against him. He accused her of cheating, a claim that was never substantiated and never believed. The divorce process lasted nearly 2 years. When the final court order came through, giving Elaine primary custody, Harold didn't speak. He just nodded, turned, and left the courtroom without a word. But something in him had snapped. The letters he began to write after Elaine's death weren't the ramblings of a madman. They were too structured, too thoughtful. They were the product of a man who believed, genuinely believed, that he was the victim. One letter, never sent, read, "She turned the kids into strangers. My own blood looked at me like I was a monster. She stripped me of my role, my identity. How can a man be a father if he's treated like a visitor in his own life?" To Harold, Elaine hadn't left him. She had betrayed him. And in his twisted logic, that betrayal was worse than anything, worse even than murder. It's easy to see a killer and forget the years that led to the moment. But those years matter. They don't excuse the violence, but they explain the depth of rot that lived inside Harold Wexler long before he pulled the trigger. And what haunts Elaine's family most isn't just the fact that Harold killed her. It's that he warned them he would, and no one believed him. In one of the court-mandated therapy sessions for the children, Harold told the counselor, "She's going to regret this. Mark my words." The counselor noted it. It was passed along. But nothing came of it. There were no threats, no clear danger, just a bitter man saying bitter things. But hindsight changes everything. Elaine's sister would later say, "We thought he was just angry, just venting. You don't think someone will actually do the thing they're hinting at. But he did. And now I live with that guilt every day. The town, too, was changed. Bedford Hollow was no longer just a quiet town. It was now a place where a man plotted murder in silence for years, and no one ever saw it coming. After the dust settled, after the manhunt ended, and the obituaries were printed, a different kind of reckoning began. One that wouldn't make headlines. One that would unfold in kitchens, therapist offices, and late-night reflections. Because Elaine Wexler was gone, and Harold Wexler, her killer, was dead. But the questions remained. What made this man? A father, an accountant, a quiet neighbor, capable of such premeditated cruelty? And how many opportunities did the system have to stop it? Elaine's family began requesting records, court transcripts, police notes, psychological evaluations. What they found wasn't just disturbing, it was infuriating. In the months before her death, Elaine had filed 2 separate complaints. One after Harold followed her car from work to the grocery store, circling the parking lot but never getting out. Another time, he had left a note on her windshield. "You can't cut me out forever." Both incidents were documented, but both were deemed non-threatening. No explicit threats, the report said. No physical confrontation. Elaine had asked for an emergency protection order. It was denied. "She's being overly cautious," the judge allegedly told the clerk. "The man hasn't laid a hand on her." But Elaine's fear wasn't about the past. It was about what she knew could come. And she was right. In the years that followed, those files would become exhibits in presentations at domestic violence conferences. Elaine's story became a case study in failure. How a system built to prevent harm too often waits until it's too late to take a woman seriously. Meanwhile, her children were trying to rebuild their lives. But trauma doesn't fade with time. It changes shape. Mason, the oldest, blamed himself. For years, he believed that if he had stopped his dad at the door, if he had grabbed the phone sooner, if he had yelled louder, maybe none of it would have happened. He grew quiet, then angry, then detached. By high school, he had moved in with an aunt in another state. He never came back to Bedford Hollow. Abby, the youngest, suffered from night terrors for nearly a decade. Every Easter, she would lock herself in her room. She once told a school counselor, "I feel like he's still out there, like he's waiting somewhere." She knew that wasn't true. But trauma doesn't respond to truth. It responds to memory. As for the middle child, Evan, he became the quiet one, just like his father once was. But different. Evan turned inward not with rage, but with pain. He rarely spoke about that day. Only once in a college essay did he write, "There's a difference between a father and a man who helped create you. A father protects. A father stays. A father doesn't kill your mother in a van and call it justice." No one in the family ever visited Harold's grave. They don't even know where it is. And they don't want to. But even after all of this, the tragedy, the therapy, the explanations, one question still haunts every person who knew Elaine. Why didn't someone stop him? Not the court. Not the counselor. Not the friends who saw her bruised smile and said nothing. Not the system that saw her fear and dismissed it as nerves. The uncomfortable truth is that Harold Wexler didn't fall through the cracks. He walked right through them while everyone was watching. Even the police, after the case closed, admitted that their hands had been tied. "We did what we could," the lead detective said. "We had no legal grounds to act before she was dead." And that, perhaps, is the most chilling part. Elaine did everything right. She filed reports. She documented harassment. She told people she was scared. But nothing changed until a man decided her life was over. Years have passed since Elaine Wexler was buried under a sky of gray clouds and broken hearts. Bedford Hollow has returned to quiet, but not quite the same quiet. Something was broken that spring. Something in the town's belief that evil always wears a warning sign. A new family lives in Elaine's old house now. The trees she planted still bloom in the spring. Her favorite flower, the white iris, still rises along the back fence. But the children who once rode bikes in that driveway, they're grown, scattered across the country. living lives shaped by the violence of one man's choices. Elaine's sister eventually raised the money for a proper headstone. The small, simple. It reads, Elaine Marie Wexler, beloved mother, sister, teacher. 1970 to 1991. She chose peace. He chose violence. Each year someone leaves fresh flowers. No one ever sees who. For years, the Wexler case was taught in law enforcement seminars. It became a textbook example of what happens when systems fail to recognize patterns. When courts mistake absence of bruises for absence of danger. When victims are forced to wait until after something terrible has happened to be believed. Elaine Wexler wasn't a mystery. She wasn't a random victim. She wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was targeted by someone who once said he loved her. And maybe that's the hardest thing for people to accept. That monsters don't always come in masks. Sometimes they come with smiles and marriage licenses. Sometimes they share your last name. Harold Wexler didn't snap. He didn't break under pressure. He planned. He calculated. He carried out the murder of the woman he swore to protect. And he fled, not in a panic, but in a pattern. A man with a map, a plan, and a purpose. He mailed letters, not apologies. Justifications. His final act wasn't sorrow, but control. In the end, Harold chose to end his life the same way he ended Elaine's. Alone, cowardly, and with a weapon in his hand. But Elaine's story is not just about how she died. It's about how she lived, and how she tried, again and again, to find her way out. It's about how she fought to reclaim her identity, to rebuild her world, even when the odds were against her. It's about the thousands of women like her who still walk that same path. Some of whom never make it as far as Elaine did. Her children carry her memory, not through newspaper clippings or police reports, but through the little things. The way she folded towels, the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen, the books she used to read aloud on stormy nights. Elaine's legacy isn't her murder. It's the life she lived in spite of fear. It's the warnings she left behind, warnings we must learn to hear. Because behind every silent stare, behind every closed curtain, behind every smile hiding a bruise, someone may be running out of time. And just like Elaine, they may not get a second chance. So if this story haunts you, let it. Let it remind you that real evil doesn't always look like a monster in the shadows. Sometimes it's just a man in a van, on a quiet road, in a quiet town, heading nowhere.